So do you guys remember the Oregon militia takeover? It happened probably about a year ago. It was a takeover of a government building, and of course they were armed. So there was a trial over this, and I'm going to give you the results here in a second. First, let me refresh you on the facts. So there were over a dozen so-called militiamen that did an armed takeover of a wildlife government building in Oregon, and they did it because they say a friend of theirs was arrested on bullshit charges, and they're convicted on charges. So the charges were over, I believe they were the Hammonds, and they had property that was right alongside government property, and they would burn their own property, and there are rules as to when you can burn your property and how much you can burn your property, and they burned their property twice, but I think both times it crossed over onto the government land, and they did it at one point during a no-burn time, and, you know, you had people from the government fighting a fire that was because of lightning, and they burned it down at the same time as the government was trying to fight the fire. Anyway, so the long story, but bottom line is these people brought up on arson charges as a result of it, and there was a mandatory minimum that went hand in hand with that, which I think was 5 years. So they were sentenced to 5 years, and you had all these right-wing guys go, whoa, so let me get this straight. You're going to arrest, our friends here for burning down their own property, or at least they were trying to burn down their own property for whatever reason. The government says to cover up illegal hunting, but they say for something else. You're going to arrest our friends, lock them up for 5 years over that. We're not going to have it. So that's when they picked up guns, and they stormed a government building in Oregon, and they took it over. And they stayed there for, I believe, 41 days. Now, in the process of that, a lot of stuff happened. There were threats. There were overt threats. There at one point was a firefight where, I forget his name, Lavoy Finicum, was it? He died. There was a video of it, and there was a lot of uproar and discussion on social media. So all this went down, and then now we had the trial for these guys. Now, remember, certain things are just not in dispute. It's just obvious what happened. I mean, it's on video, son. So them taking up arms, storming a government building, and occupying it, not in dispute. It's what they did. So now what did we learn? Well, Reuters explains here, quote, a federal court jury on Thursday acquitted anti-government militant leader Ammon Bundy and 6 followers of conspiracy charges stemming from their role in the armed takeover earlier this year. Bundy and others, including his brother and co-defendant Ryan Bundy, cast the 41-day occupation of the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge as a legitimate and patriotic act of civil disobedience. Prosecutors called it a lawless scheme to seize federal property by force. The 12-member panel found the Bundy brothers and their co-defendants, 3 men and a woman, not guilty of the most serious charge of conspiracy to impede federal officers through intimidation, threats, or force. That charge alone carried a maximum penalty of 6 years in prison. The defendants also were unanimously acquitted of illegal possession of firearms in a federal facility and of theft of government property, except in the case of Ryan Bundy, for whom jurors are deadlocked on the charge of theft. Okay. Now, keep in mind exactly what those charges are as I give you more information here. So, they were found not guilty of the most serious charge, which is conspiracy to impede federal officers through intimidation, threats, or force. And they were also found guilty of illegal possession of firearms in a federal facility. Okay, well, hold on. But that's not in dispute. That happened. There's video of it. They have firearms in a federal facility, and that's illegal. They were still found not guilty. That doesn't make any sense. They did it. Yeah, but not guilty. Okay, but they did it. We have it on tape. Okay, but not guilty. What? And they say theft of government property. I don't know where the dispute is over that, too. They stormed a government building with guns and occupied it for 41 days. There's no dispute over the theft of the property. What is that? They didn't borrow it when the government said, yeah, you can come in here and stay for 41 days. That didn't happen. So what is that? Again, not guilty. Now, to go back to the main charge that they were acquitted on. Again, conspiracy to impede federal officers through intimidation, threats, or force. Well, one of the guys wrote a book titled Only by Blood and Suffering, Regaining Lost Freedom. All right, now you can argue, well, look, he's just saying blood, okay, but he didn't say it then and there. He wrote the book beforehand, so it's not like a threat right then and there. Okay, fine. One of the other guys said, quote, I didn't come here to shoot. I came here to die. Now, does that sound like a conspiracy to impede federal officers through intimidation, threats, or force? And then, finally, I have a video here for you guys. This is from the militia takeover. This is during the militia. I keep using the word militia. I shouldn't really use that word. I should use a different word. We'll get to that again a little bit later, but this is from their takeover. This is what they said during the takeover when they were illegally on federal lands that they stole and occupied.
Media's been waiting for a bloodbath this whole time we've been here. Now there's going to be one and they're running. They're told to run because the feds don't want to know who's murdering us. American people better wake up, get here, and fight for your country. Right now, it is on. What you gonna do? What you gonna do when the militia comes after you, FBI?
Not guilty of conspiracy to impede federal officers through intimidation, threats, or force. This is a farce. This is a sham. They're guilty, and they were found not guilty. Now, stop and think about it. Flip the script. What would happen? The new Black Panthers storm a government building. Incompetent. Armed. They occupy that building for 41 days. Did they get off? The Crips do it. The Bloods do it. You know, you have some Muslim group, some Muslim organization in the U.S. storms a government building over some grievance because their friend was arrested for something that they find illegitimate. Muslims storm a government building with guns, occupied for 41 days, threaten the FBI like you just saw right there on tape. Did they get away with it? Did they get away with it? You know the answer to that question. I don't care. You could be the biggest Trump supporter in the world. You could be the biggest right-winger in the world. You know they don't get away with it. It's not a question. And if you answer, yeah, they would get away with it, you're just lying. You're just lying. So what do we have here? Well, I mean, look, we have either the best defense lawyer in the world, which is possible, or you have just obvious double standards and bias. Well, I mean, come on now. What they was mad about was legitimate. So, I mean, I guess sometimes you got to take some guns and take over a government building and occupy for 41 days and do threats to federal authorities. Sometimes you got to do what you got to do, man. Sometimes that is what it is. I also love the irony how in that video, he's like, you got to come fight for your country, screaming at people. Yeah, fighting for the country would be fighting for the other team. It would be fighting on the side of the government to get the armed occupiers out of there. And by the way, remember I said I should be using a different term for them? Yeah, the term is terrorist. You're doing violence and threats of violence for a political or religious ideology. That is the textbook definition of terrorism. Would anybody not call them terrorists if it was armed Muslims that took over a government building and occupied it for 41 days? Would anybody not call them terrorists if it was the new Black Panthers that did it? Everybody would call them terrorists. Oh, violence for politics. Terrorism, the textbook definition. But in this case, militiamen, patriots. Oh, please, man. Now, understand something. So if you take the guns out of the equation, I think it's a totally different story. So if they don't have guns and they do a protest where they do a sit-in at a government building, totally fine. I let them go on everything. The fact that you had guns, you did an armed takeover of a government building, you stayed there for 41 days, and you threatened the authorities directly in the process. No, now it's not even close. You're guilty. But they got off. They got off. By the way, there was also some craziness that apparently unfolded in the courtroom directly after the verdict, where the judge didn't give the immediate terms of their release for the people who were all found not guilty. And so their lawyer started screaming at the judge, and then he was like tackled by law enforcement, and some reports he was even tasered. I don't know, there's no video of it, or at least not yet, but that's also fucking crazy. But look at this story. I mean, how can anybody not conclude that there are double standards in our justice system when you see this? I mean, that jury was duped, they were dumb, or that defense lawyer is the best ever, but either way, it's unacceptable because it's on tape. We know they're guilty, and now there's no consequences. And most importantly, you think this isn't going to embolden other people who are part of the right-wing so-called militia movements to do similar things? You are fucking crazy if you don't think that. Now these people are heroes on the right, on the far right, I should say, because it's not all people on the right who agree with them. In fact, most disagreed with them. But on the super-duper fringe right, the militia movement people, the sovereign citizens people, now they're heroes. And now there's going to be more of this because you just incentivized it by not punishing them when they obviously broke the law. Well done.